Immanuel Kant's quote, "Dare to know," captures the core essence of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was centered around the development and acceptance of new ideas and change. The ideologies of conservatism and liberalism were at odds, as they are today. The intellectual scene became a battleground of absolute rule against democracy. The roots of the Enlightenment lie in that of the scientific revolution and skepticism. The concepts of natural laws has led to postulates of natural rights that ought to be protected. In addition, travel reports and increased skepticism of religion led to criticism of religious intolerance, dogmatism, and superstition. Essentially, the enlightened thinkers thought, if nature is dictated by natural laws, why can't human nature? Hobbes and Locke exemplify the conservatism versus liberalism struggle. Hobbes vouched for greater control and oppression, while Locke pushed for concepts of natural rights and the protection of natural rights. Thomas Hobbes is known as one of the founders of modern political philosophy. His book Leviathan, founded later, was political philosophy and also deemed the social contract theory. His principles were founded on the fact that men were untrustworthy and evil, and that their autonomy must be curtailed through oppression and authoritarian rule to ensure a more prosperous society. Locke's main philosophy was that everyone was born with a tabula rasa, or blank mind. Locke's idea of a tabula rasa gave people a reason to doubt religious authority and teaching. He often taught how all knowledge is gained and derived from reason and experience, rather than through heredity or faith. Locke truly believed that if people were ruled under proper influences, they could help build a new society through reason and completely change it. Isaac Newton was also a strong supporter of this philosophy of reason. Together, Locke and Newton were able to influence many philosophers during the Enlightenment. The term philosophe is just a French term given to the intellectuals of the Enlightenment. Philosophers had many different job occupations that ranged from being literary people to professors to journalists to statesmen to economics to political scientists and most importantly social reformers. Some of the most influential philosophers of the Enlightenment were known as Montesquieu, Voltaire, and Rousseau. Rousseau believed that a government ought to operate by the general will of the people. A common example of his philosophy come to life would be democracy, because the government is by the people, for the people, and of the people. Montesquieu expressed many of his reasoning for the Enlightenment in his first work, The Persian Letters. In the Persian Letters, Montesquieu was able to attack traditional religion, advocate religious toleration, denunciate slavery, and use reason to liberate human beings from their prejudices. Although the Persian Letters helped advance the ideas of the Enlightenment, Montesquieu's most famous work, The Spirit of the Laws, greatly advanced the cause of the Enlightenment. The Spirit of Laws compared different forms of governments and described their flaws. Montesquieu focused mainly on discussing three different types of governments: republics, monarchies, and despotisms. He explained how republics were reasonable for ruling small states, how monarchies were substantial for ruling middle-sized states, and how despotisms were appropriate for ruling large states. He also stressed the importance of the separation of powers, which is where the powers of the executive, legislative, and judicial systems are equal, and how it provides a state with the greatest freedom and security. Montesquieu's presentation of the separation of powers served in the creation of the U.S. Constitution. Voltaire was probably the greatest figure in the Enlightenment due to his strong criticism of traditional religion and his strong attachment to the ideal of religious toleration. Much like other philosophers, Voltaire admired England's government system. In his philosophic letters on the English, he promoted the natural rights such as the freedom of speech, political freedom, and religious toleration. While Voltaire admired England's greatness, he criticized France because of its ruling system, which was a royal absolutism, and its lack of religious toleration and freedom of thought. These flaws in an absolute monarchy would soon lead to revolutionary outbreaks. During the Enlightenment, new art styles such as Rococo showed grace and royalty. The style of art began to influence more architecture and art as the previous dominant styles began to fade away. One exception to this was neoclassicism, which continued to thrive and was established movement in France. Neoclassicism focused on traditional Greek and Roman classical art. During the Enlightenment, new music also began to arise, such as opera. The Baroque musical style, which dominated this time, had two main composers who stood out from all other musicians of the time. Their names were Bach and Handel, and they were undoubtedly the best musicians of the time. Another really good artist and musician was Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, who was known for perfecting the arts of concerto, symphony, and opera. The philosophers perfected the writing of history. As before, little had been recorded, but due to their secular orientation, they concentrated heavily on their mark on the earth. Some philosophers believe that the fall of Rome was directly connected to the rise of Christianity during that time, and so almost all philosophers were atheists. High culture is defined as the artistic world of the rich and the classes that were in very high government positions. Meanwhile, popular culture is known as the lore of the majority of the people. During this time, books were mainly for the elite classes, but they became more readily available for the poor, though they were pretty much only read by elites. Europe had many schools during this time, which the philosophers believed were used specifically to keep children in their classes. Thank you for watching this video all the way through. I hope you have learned a little bit about the Enlightenment period. I hope you have a good rest of the day. Jay-Z Wello, signing out.